Welcome to the Talking Devils podcast. This is Manchester United's greatest game series, a series dedicated to the greatest games in Manchester United history. I'm Wayne Barton, your host, joined by long-standing United supporters and authors themselves, Roy Cavanagh, MBE, and David Blatt, who deserves an MBE but doesn't have one. So there you go. So this episode, we're going to look at that very important aspect of Manchester United's identity, the youth. And we've all picked out a game today. Well, David's picked out two. We'll allow him his little eccentric choice there. But we've given him two. Roy and I have picked out one game apiece that we feel really summarises and signals what Manchester United's identity is with relation to their youth and tells stories around those games for the purpose of this podcast. So, Roy, why don't you kick us off with telling us your choice of game for this criteria?
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. As a young 10-year-old, I can still remember a match in November 1957 against Tottenham Hotspur at Old Trafford. Now, it'd be interesting if someone disputes this fact or comes up with another alternative. But I'm going to say that this was the first time that United played a whole 11 players who'd actually appeared in their junior sides, such as the A, B team, as well as the reserves. It was a pretty close call, mind you, because the night before the game, Ray Wood went down with flu. So this caused Busby a real problem, but he brought in young David Gaskell for his league debut as a 17-year-old. I say his league debut because the year before, in October 1956, young David Gaskell, as a 16-year-old, 19-day youngster, was thrown into the Charity Shield game against City at Main Road when Raywood got injured and David came on, and United won the Charity Shield 1-0 that day. So here he was playing against Tottenham Hotspur, Busby Babes, two times champions at late November 1957. The only other players besides Raywood on the staff at that time who'd cost transfer fees were Johnny Berry, a brilliant outside right, and Tommy Taylor, the world's greatest centre forward. Both of them, like Wood, were actually they were injured and missed this game against Tottenham. So the only other query in that 11 would be Colin Webster. Colin Webster joined United from Cardiff City on a free transfer. His actual contract with Cardiff had finished. He was in national service alongside Dennis Violet. They said, "Why don't you come along to United?" So he actually signed for United and played in the A team um, before making it into the reserves and then the first team. The team against Tottenham was Gaskell, Fawkes, Byrne, Coleman, Jackie Blanchflower, Edwards, Scanlon on the right wing, Whelan, Webster, Charlton, and Pegg. 7 of those players would actually win the FA Youth Cup for United, whilst the other 4 had all been at the club before the start of that competition in 1952-53. United, though, were going through a difficult time following the 2 consecutive titles, the FA Cup final when they were robbed against Aston Villa, and the European Cup semi-final of 57 when they played the mighty Real Madrid. They started the game well against Tottenham with Pegg scoring after about a quarter of an hour, and everyone thought, well, we're going to be okay here. Then the wheels came off. Tottenham's captain was Danny Blanchflower, who was Jackie's brother. And it was Danny Blanchflower who got the equaliser in the game. And then the wheels really, really came off because for the last 20 minutes of the first half, Tottenham scored a further 3 goals, all via their centre forward, big burly Bobby Smith, who absolutely destroyed Jackie Blanchflower on this day. And Jackie was a marvellous footballer for United, and I mean a top footballer. A man who played as number 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, and in goal for the club. Ball playing, a Martin Buchan type player. But Smith really took it to him that day. And in the second half, after Matt Busby's wisdom at half time, Billy Whelan pulled the goal back, and then Peck got his second goal with still about half an hour, 25 minutes to go. Um, but we finally lost the game 4-3. For a young 10-year-old, this was a nasty shock, although I had seen United lose before. For a statistical note, this was the first time a London team had actually won at Old Trafford since 1938. Sadly, like London buses, the next home match was against Chelsea, and we lost that 1-0. But that meant that if you went back to the Portsmouth game in October, which we'd lost, we'd played 12 games, won 5, drew 2, and lost 5. We were in the middle as well of being in the European Cup. We qualified through against Duckler Park to play Red Star, of course. But Matt Busby acted. He went out and bought Harry Gregg, so my hero Raywood was out. Johnny Berry on the right wing was dropped, and young Kenny Morgans was given his chance. Bobby Charlton came in probably for the first time, when I say on merit, because until then he'd really filled in as Whelan or Taylor or Violet replacement. But he came in with Billy Whelan getting dropped. And Albert Scanlon came in on the left wing with David Pegg getting dropped. And, as is Busby's want, his touch of magic happened, because from those games, Leicester City, I think it was, Harry Gregg's debut, they went undefeated all the way through up to and including the fateful Red Star Belgrade game. And sadly, of course, the day after that, Munich, and everything changed. But that Tottenham Hotspur game back in November '57 has gotten a piece, I feel, in United's history.
Yeah, compelling stuff that, Roy, and I completely agree with you. A very significant game. I mean, we all know, yeah, Alex Ferguson was renowned for his ruthlessness, and so was Matt Busby in a way. But I mean, that's a special kind of ruthlessness, isn't it? Signing a goalkeeper to replace Ray Wood when Ray Wood didn't even play in the Spurs game is a bit difficult on him. But I mean, that's just a joke. Obviously, Gaskell played at many games for United after that, including winning the 1963 FA Cup final as well, even though he had a difficult time in that game. But very much so. I mean, I always remember the quote from James Gibson when he took over as chairman, and he was tasked with this youth policy alongside Crickmer and Rocker. It was very much, the comment was something like a Manchester team for Manchester people. And that's as close as it probably came, really, with, I mean, homegrown 11. Not all of them from Manchester, of course, but the spirit of what the club is supposed to be very much summed up in that game. David, you have chosen 2 different games. Why don't you talk us through your choices and why?
Yeah. Well, as we know, youth is so important to Manchester United. I couldn't find the statistics, but I think we hold the English, European, or world, or world record for the number of consecutive academy players coming through the system. The first one to talk about was at City, early 70s. It was Sammy Mack's first game. He was only 17 years old, and it was he came through under Frank O'Farrell, of all people. And it was his debut in the famous 3-3, his first of 419 games he played for United. And we weren't in the Kippack United lot. For some reason or other, we were in the opposite stand, amongst all the City fans. But that made it even more enjoyable. The atmosphere was incredible. It was at a time when actually both teams were on the way down. There was a desperation there. But the noise and so on, incredible. And I remember it was in the 39th minute. Best did a run. I remember it now. He played a ball out to Kidd. Kidd was about to send it back to Best, but was cut down by Tony Book, which should have been a penalty. But the ball ran loose to Sammy, and he side-footed it into the net. And we went bananas, and any other fruit you'd like to mention. I always remember, reading about it. George Best said, before the game, he came up to Sammy and said, if you score a goal today, I'll buy you a bottle of champagne. Well, I'm sure that's the first of many he would have got by him. And another couple of statistics, which is quite interesting regarding United and City and youth. Phil Neville made his debut in the derby against City, which we won 3-0 at City. And Ryan Giggs, though he had already started against Everton as a sub, his first appearance from the start was against City in 1991. So there seems to be some connection between those two clubs. Can't work it out, but there you go. And the other game, which means a lot to me and for United fans where youth wins out, is a replay in 1989 of the FA Cup third round. We'd played QPR at Old Trafford. Now, this was in the era, it had been, 22 years since we won the league, and it didn't look like we'd ever do it again under present circumstances. It was a depressing, overcast afternoon, and that was a depressing, overcast match. Only 36,000 turned up. We think of Old Trafford being full every time, but the apathy mentally had gripped supporters. We came out of duty, but we know fire in the bellies. 36,000 turned up for this game. It was 0-0. It was a forgettable game, but what we all remembered in the last minute was seeing Brian Robson laying flat on the ground and the world stood still, because that was at the era where if Robson didn't play, we were nothing. Whether you fill a bath full of water or champagne, if there's no plug hole, it all disappears. He was our plug hole. And so I remember we were there for 10 minutes. The referee blew the whistle, but he wasn't moving. And we all thought, Christ, he's dead. What's going to happen? And no one knew. They didn't put anything over the loudspeaker. We exited the stadium feeling really down and dead, because that was in the era where we had a little run here, it went bad here. Just a few days earlier, we'd actually beaten Liverpool 3-1 at Old Trafford, 44,000 for that one. But the following day, we'd lost away to Borough 1-0. It was that sort of season, as it always was. So we thought, right, FA Cup third round, we're going to get knocked out here. Let's go to the next game. So I swear half of Manchester descended on Loftus Road on the following Wednesday. 3/4 of the ground was United. A great atmosphere. We thought, well, we'll go down singing. What the hell? And everybody talks about the class of 92. Very few people talk about the class of 89. In that game, we had Tony Gill, Russell Beardsmore, Lee Sharp, believe it or not, Lee Martin, David Wilson, and the legend that will always be Ralph Milne. So the game starts, and for us, it was a revelation. We had young people with enthusiasm, with skill. They seemed to know what they're doing with each other. And so it was just, we thought we saw the future ahead of us. It was 0-0 at half time, but we were buzzing with the sort of football and the youth. It was all about United. And then in the 57th minute, Mark Steen, the journeyman for QPR, but good player, he opened the scoring for QPR against a run of play. But then in the 75th minute, Tony Gill made it 1-1. So it was 1-1 after 90 minutes. It goes to extra time. 14 minutes into extra time, Daniel Graham got 2-1 ahead. We went bananas again, and any other fruit you're kind to mention. But in the last minute of the extra time, Alan McDonald got it 2-2. So we exited the ground 2-2, but we were buzzing because we'd seen the future. We were not to know that one by one, injuries or whatever, that team would dissipate. But just coming out the ground was a buzz. It was United, it was youth, it was the future. And we felt good. How often do you feel good with the draw? But we felt good that day. Of course, we went on to win the second replay 3-0 at Old Trafford. We beat Oxford in the fourth round 4-0, but lost the quarterfinals to Forest 1-0. There you go. Because those were the days where we never thought we'd win the league, but a good run in the cup would help us. Just like when we beat Liverpool at Old Trafford a few days beforehand, in the 80s, we seemed to have the bogey over Liverpool. Even if we weren't playing well, we'd beat Liverpool, but then Everton would always beat us. It was that era. And so they are my two games.
Great choices, those. The QPR game, yeah, I definitely remember that well. The kids came in, you're quite right there. I always think of that, the Liverpool game with Russell Beardsmore. He scored, and I think that was the first time really Old Trafford had been alive under Alex Ferguson. Like I said, there'd been the apathy there. It was an era where all the fanzines were born. And then you had Beardsmore scoring, Ferguson seeing firsthand what these just introducing the kids could do, really, and the kind of galvanising effect it had on the support and sort of bringing them out of the weariness. But like I said, obviously, we were robbed in that quarter-final against Nottingham Forest. I don't care what anyone says. Even though the following year, we play them in the Cup. And as a very different story on United's fate with one of those kids who were playing around that time, Mark Robbins scoring the goal and United moving on. I think without these earlier moments, you don't have those moments. Everything leads to the next point. And all of that really led to all of that period under Ferguson where he brought in all the kids, led to the game that was my choice, really. And when I was researching for the book, Football Taught by Matt Busby, and even like any research of Fergie's era, the Aston Villa game in 2009 seems like a really obvious one because Makeda, who's a kid who's given his debut and scores 20 minutes into it, and United going to win the league. It's a very obvious catalytic moment in terms of like where it takes United in the short term. But how it ties into United's history in the long term is a really, really incredible thing. And I think it's the value of Fergie at the time being in that job for 23 years. He has been around the club for so long that he knows the impacts that kids have when you bring them in. They have a kind of, like I said, the galvanizing impact. At that time, we had a few players who were inconsistent. You know, we had an injury crisis. Obviously, that's why Makeda and Danny Welbeck were on the bench. I think Nani was playing and he was frustrating a few fans, as he tended to do around the time. He was one of the players brought off, and Makeda and Welbeck were thrown in. Now Villa had a great defence at the time. I think it was Jacob Lawson was one of the defenders, Quella, one of the others. Really experienced defenders who wouldn't have been expected to be worrying if any other team had brought on teenagers. You just say, all right, we'll see how the game. Well, they're 2-1 up. They're a very good, experienced side. I think Martin O'Neill was still manager then. So they would have thought, we could easily see out the game. Well, Makeda had scored in a reserve game a few days earlier. He'd been on the periphery, really, nowhere near the first team squad. But he was called in for this, the momentum going in his favour. Ferguson really, this is how you know a great manager, but also the value of having a manager who's been around for a long time and knows the club and knows his squad is that we can sort of plug into that momentum. You can see where it goes. Well, he did that with Makeda, and honestly, I do believe that any other club, I think this does sum up United's relationship with the youth, that any other club you can bring on a kid and it wouldn't work out the way that it worked out. But, United's fans got behind the players. a little bit extra burst from the support. That, I mean, there was a bit of a beleaguered air at that time because we'd lost a couple of games in a row. I think we'd lost at Fulham and we'd lost Rooney and Scholes were both sent off. That's why they were missing in this game. It was that kind of wobble where Liverpool were really starting to come to the fore. And really, it's only one of the few times in history that United and Liverpool have been involved in a title race against each other, and we were going for the 18th title. We were going to draw with them on league titles, so they had all this kind of history attached to it anyway. But to read the atmosphere, to sort of say we'll bring on teenagers into that kind of high pressure environment, says everything about what is good about what United are. And I remember talking to Rennie Mullenstein about this and saying, well, what would you say to those kids when you're bringing them into that atmosphere? And he said, well, we just said the same thing that we always said: go out there and enjoy yourself. Imagine saying that to kids who that sums up United in the best kind of way. And they certainly did enjoy themselves. I think Makeda misses a chance. Welbeck missed an earlier chance. Brad Friedel, imperious in goal whenever it came to playing against United, but on this occasion, finally beaten by this amazing Makeda goal where he's on the half turn and shoots. Kobbie Mainoo scored a goal against Liverpool last year that was very, very close to it in terms of aesthetic, but in terms of how it affected the Old Trafford crowd that day. It was just a moment of, again, plugging into that momentum and knowing that there's a rebirth of energy around, a galvanisation of everything that kept United going for the rest of that season, because Liverpool was still good. They still put up a chase, took United all the way. And United, as a result of that, Makeda, people often forget, scored as a sub, the winning goal in the following week at Sunderland, kept that momentum going. Now, Makeda may have a bit of a footnote in United history, really, because that will be pretty much people will see that as his only contribution. And they'll say that with a bit of a denigrating impact, say, oh, well, yeah, that's all he did. But I go back to David's point when he talks about the players like David Wilson and Tony Gill and Daniel Graham. You have to have all these players who all combined play a role in that same kind of atmosphere that was created in the Busby Babes, going back to Roy's point of all the players coming into the side and playing to sort of make it 10 out of 11 or 11 out of 11, as the case may be. But those were our choices, guys. I'm not saying that mine is the final statement on that was the definitive one. I just think all of us made really good points about that. I think David's niche call of that QPR game is really fascinating one to me in terms of United's identity. We played QPR so many times that season, owing to the replays, of course, but we played them one final tail before we go. We played them in a league game right at the end of the season, and they scored within the last minutes to win 3-2. United were winning, I think, at one point, and they'd thrown it away, like Dave said, typical of United of the era. But QPR, who were nowhere, they weren't doing anything, really. They were a good QPR side, but they weren't going to win the league, and they weren't going to challenge for Europe. But Paul Parker, who was playing in the side, reminded me that told me the story, not reminded me because I wasn't there, told me the story of how he remembered Trevor Francis, who was their player manager, coming in with bottles of champagne and telling everyone to celebrate because they'd beaten Manchester United. They told you the standard they were playing against and how odd teams would play against the reputation of the club. And so those were all the different sides of United. And it tells you a little bit about the value of what youth brings to the club in order to sort of bring it over the most unlikely of scenarios. I mean, we've mentioned 3-4 games there, but I mean, a really recent one where we've had youth get us over the line in a game we weren't expected to win was the FA Cup final last season, which we probably wouldn't have won if those players weren't from the academy, with Kobbie and Alejandro Garnacho scoring the goals in that. Those were our choices, guys. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Get talking in the comments. We will be back soon to discuss more games which best embody the Busby philosophy. Hope you will continue to join us on that